Quote by Anonymous from sometime in the early 21st century. I see the same tensions that arose in economies have now risen in media and information. Freedom of information versus censorship, with good arguments on both sides. Truth is, I don't see humans being able to get a handle on it, and likely our species isn't long for this universe. The game seems to be creating artificial minds and self-replicating robots before we destroy ourselves. Or maybe that will destroy us. I think this is the fate of all thinking creatures. At some point, the center can no longer hold, and the only possible legacy is the machine mind devoid of emotion and consciousness.
The clomping of feet descending down carpeted stairs caused the making of breakfast to be paused, and the woman making it to exclaim, "Hey, don't stomp your feet like that! You sound like a herd of elephants!" The girl, responsible for said elephantine stomping, stopped at the bottom of the staircase. Her pouting face was betrayed by the smell of fresh pancakes, and although she slouched and slumped her way to a seat at the kitchen counter, her eyes were smiling. "Come on, eat up! Today's your big day," the woman said. As she placed a plate with 2 warm pancakes in front of the girl, the pancakes were covered in butter and maple syrup. The girl dropped the bag she was carrying onto the floor beside her and reached out to collect a fork in one hand and the plate of pancakes with the other. She pulled the pancakes closer to her. They smelled good, really, really good, and she let out an involuntary sigh that was in anticipation of tasting them, which she then tried to make into a sound of annoyance. "Don't mope," the woman said. "This is your last day, and after this there's no more school for you ever. Now eat up." She placed a glass of cold, freshly squeezed orange juice next to the plate, and the girl drank almost half of it before finally tucking into the pancakes. The woman turned back to the stove and put the pan she'd been using, along with some other utensils, into the kitchen sink to wash later. She pulled down her sleeves that she had rolled up while cooking and turned around again in time to see the girl swallowing the last piece of pancake and then finishing off the orange juice. "That was delicious," the girl said. "Thank you, Mother." The woman was hit with a bolt of anger and frustration, and she had to grab onto the edge of the kitchen counter to contain her desire to swing her limbs with wild abandon. "I've told you before, I'm not your fucking mother." An eternity of rage boiled inside her as they both stared at each other in silence. Eventually the girl pushed the empty plate and glass away from her and stood up. "I know," she said. With that she reached down, picked up her bag and backed away from the kitchen counter, her eyes locked on the woman's glare with steely indifference. After several steps backwards, she eventually spun around and went running into the hallway and then out of the house. "Wish me luck!" she shouted over her shoulder as she slammed the front door behind her. The woman was still clutching the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, her face red. The deep seething inside her chest finally subsiding into a fleeting feeling of hate and then into what felt like pointless self-pity. She'd been here before. She knew the futility of these emotions. Pointless self-pity.
Don noticed a single droplet of water snaking a path down the surface of his car windscreen. He heard the familiar pitter-patter of rain as multitudes more droplets joined the first. He placed a protective hand gently on his wife's stomach and turned to comfort her. "Sally, you're going to be okay. We'll be there in 5 minutes." His wife was breathing heavily and calmly, reassured by her husband's touch, but worried about giving birth. "I know, but please hurry," she said. The rainfall intensified, and by the time Don pulled in front of the hospital, he could barely hear what his wife was saying. He jumped out into a wall of water and ran around to the other side of the car. It was only when he opened the passenger door could he hear his wife say, "There's something wrong." The next few minutes were a disembodied blur. Later, Don remembered bursting into the hospital shouting for help, then picking up and carrying his wife, who was crying in pain. He remembered a nurse pulling him down a short corridor and into a room with machines. More nurses followed them in, or maybe it was doctors. He was yelling, and Sally looked pale and terrified. That was the last time he saw her alive. Years later, Don would tell his therapist that there's nothing in life that is permanent, and that he believes he loves his daughter more than most fathers, because his wife's death was caused by her birth. He felt he was compelled to love her, otherwise his wife died for no reason. But deep down, he knew that he blamed her. He knew that life would have been impossible if he ever had to admit that to himself. He didn't tell the therapist that last part, but that was how he really felt. The burden of never knowing her mother, Rain had confessed to her college roommate after a few too many glasses of wine, is that she always felt a bit empty. Even worse, she felt smothered by her father, and sometimes she would catch a certain look on his face. The person responsible for his wife's death looked so much like his wife. This is how Rain remembers her formative years, and this is what shaped who she was. Despite all her emotional issues, Rain was brilliant. One of her professors referred to her as a genius and asked her if she would be interested in publishing a book with him. The area of her apparent genius? Mathematics.